In this exciting episode, feeling hungry this morning? I could use an extra egg and some sausage. Venison would be nice. Thank you much. Sprinkle a little Homer on top to make it all go down smooth. Sing, Muse! Don't mind if I do. It's Perry Mason, Season 4, Episode 26, The Case of the Duplicate Daughter. Welcome to the Perry Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy. My purpose, pretty simple, provide an audio companion to every episode of television's greatest legal drama, Perry Mason. Each episode, we give you a summary of the plot. We even compare plots with the Earl Stanley Gardner novel if the episode was an adaptation. We give you a little trivia, reveal the episode's theme, and revel in a Perry proverb. That's a pearl of wisdom from the man himself. Before we head to the water cooler, where just like Perry, Della, and Paul, we can discuss the ins and outs of our fave legal cruise adventures. But first, say it with me, to the Law Library! Each time we visit the law library, we discuss a legal conundrum from Perry's case that helps us set future courtroom precedents. The case ends with a thorny legal issue: inheritance, children out of wedlock, identical twins, and odd stipulations regarding the disbursement of cash.
Was the $2 million on inheritance, or was it a settlement? Will Phyllis get the balance of the estate, or will she share with Glamis in the $2 million? It's a very thorny legal problem.
The dilemma has three possible solutions. Number one, mediation and settlement. The involved parties can have legal help in reaching an agreement about the inheritance. Number two, probate court, where the case goes to a judge who must interpret the will. Number three, the creation of a new trust under the advisement of legal counsel. I wonder what legal wizard could untie that humdinger of a knot. Now, let's get to the plot of this episode. The Case of the Duplicate Daughter. We open on an exterior shed as an older man, one Carter Gilman, views it cautiously from his breakfast table. His daughter enters and begins adapting Homer freestyle to the task of delivering her father his morning pick-me-up.
The glorious gifts of the gods may not be cast aside. Behold, the noble Homer said, cometh the Java, hot, black, and delicious.
But Papa wants more ambrosia, you dig?
Muriel, baby, I'm awfully hungry this morning. How about another egg and some more of that venison sausage?
When Muriel comes back, Papa's done gone. Do what now? Muriel checks with her sleepy stepmom.
What is it, Muriel?
Dad, he didn't finish his breakfast and I'm looking for him.
It's obvious he's not here.
Sorry, Nancy.
And her sleepy stepsister, who's got a man staying in the guest room.
Oh, what are you doing? Banging around this time of night?
I'm sorry I woke you, Glamis.
Oh, it's not me, silly. You might have wakened Hartley.
Hartley? Hartley Elliott here?
Mm-hmm. In the guest room. Something went wrong with his car when he brought me home, so of course I asked him to spend the night in the guest room.
Muriel goes out to the shed that Papa was staring at initially and finds a bunch of $100 bills on the ground and something red. Cue that scream in 3, 2, 1. Back in Perrytown, USA, Della reports Muriel's phone call. They put 2 and 2 together and...
Perry, yesterday afternoon late a man called. He wanted an appointment and said it was of extreme urgency. I gave him an appointment at 11:30. Here, 11:30 this morning. Mr. Edward Carter.
Edward Carter? Carter Gilman.
Mm-hmm.
When Perry checks in with Muriel, he allays her worries.
The red stain on the floor is not blood. It's paint.
Oh, thank heaven.
But then Edward Carter shows up at Perry's office, and the meeting features some less than frank requests from someone who's obviously Carter Gilman.
I'm acting on behalf of a friend, a very dear friend, A woman who happens to be married to a man who was also a friend of mine.
Her name?
Gilman. Nancy Gilman.
Blackmail.
Mr. Mason, Mrs. Gilman is being blackmailed.
And you being her friend, want me to do something about it?
Yes, sir, that's why I'm here. I want to know what's in her past, so that we know what hold the blackmailer has over her.
We got ourselves a title, folks.
I'm very fond of the entire family, and particularly the two daughters. They're as different as night and day. But where Mr. and Mrs. Gilman are concerned, they're duplicate and devoted daughters.
Perry tries to hand Paul a little business, but Gilman isn't biting. Perry puts Paul on the task anyway, but Paul has news for Perry regarding the deceased status of professional rival, that's my pure speculation, Vera Martel. Tell us all about it, Paul.
Paul, are you sure Vera Martel is dead?
I didn't check the corpse personally, but I'm sure.
What happened?
The highway patrol found a body down a ravine in the Hollywood Hills. Turned out to be one Vera Martel.
Accident?
Supposed to look like it, but it wasn't. It was murder. She was strangled sometime this morning. Pretty funny routine, too.
What do you mean?
Well, Vera's clothes were loaded with sawdust. Sawdust from real expensive wood yet. And one spot on her dress was all smeared with red paint.
Perry goes to the family and asks for more info. Glamis is playing hard to like.
Do any of you know Vera Martel? Thanks. You've been a big help, all of you.
Mr. Mason, you pick a name out of thin air and you throw it at us. Who is Vera Martel?
She was a private detective, possibly a blackmailer. She was murdered this morning.
Nancy Gilman gives it out hot to Perry, too. And then the cops show up. Perry gets Paul to follow the first Gilman gal that goes a-running. That would be Glamis. Oh, I'm sorry. I mean Glamis Barlow. Paul convenes with his operative in Las Vegas. Paul ends up in Vera Martel's office and finds our man Carter Gilman holed up in a closet. The cops come in, too.
I don't know who you are, mister. Not yet. But you made us move in before we wanted to. This place has been staked out for an hour. Gilman, you're under arrest. You're wanted in Los Angeles for the murder of Vera Martel.
Paul fills in some details on the checkered past of Nancy Gilman, but note Paul's dubious methods.
Perry, I think we hit the jackpot. I had to get a friend stoned to do it, and he'll probably hate me. But
You did what, Paul? Is the Mary J you used to get your informant to talk going to be on the expense account? Anywho, it boils down to the fact that Nancy's first husband, Stephen Barlow, isn't actually Glamis's dad. But Glamis's actual dad left her a boatload of cash. List our suspects, Perry.
Muriel, Glamis, Nancy, Carter, and now Stephen Barlow are involved.
Well, there's one more, the Gilman's overnight guest, Glamis's boyfriend, Hartley Elliott.
Visiting jail, Perry runs into a client roadblock. Cough it up, Carter!
After I saw somebody running out of the workshop, upset, frightened, and almost panicky.
Who was it?
A member of my family.
Which member of your family?
Sorry, I'm not going to tell you that.
Carter also reveals he's been doing some monkey business with Vera Martel's keys. And finally, Perry gets to use the word compunction in a sentence. If you see a chance, you better take it.
Someone else may have seen the frightened person who ran out of that workshop. And they'll likely have no compunction whatsoever about revealing in court the identity of the person you're trying to protect.
Hartley Elliott, the boy toy of Glamis, reveals that the family member he wouldn't reveal that he saw coming out of the shed was his own soon-to-be fiancé? Say it ain't so.
If you're thinking of running away, as an attorney and officer of the court, I must tell you it's your duty to testify.
Then Hartley does the math in his head and makes like he's blowing town. We finally reach court. Hamilton Berger calls, in succession, Dr. Hoxie, Lieutenant Tragg, Orville Renbacher, Keysmith, Maurice Fellows.
There were impressions in the clay, and using them, I made him a set of keys.
Muriel Gilman, Hartley Elliott, who gets hung with contempt, Glamis Barlow, and Glenn McCoy. The issue surrounding Glamis's possible guilt gets so distraught that the judge has to take a teeter-totter break.
the court wishes to take this whole matter under advisement. This court is adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
As we wait for the judge's decision, Paul gets to tell Perry he's wrong.
Perry, I finally located that 10 grand you found in the workshop.
The blackmail money? Good.
Maybe good, maybe not. Who told you it was blackmail money?
Well, it had to be. The money had to belong to one of the Gilmans. Obviously, the one who was being blackmailed by Vera Martell.
Nope, you're wrong. The money belonged to Vera Martell.
Trag hands Perry a subpoena deuces take him to produce the cash he recovered from the work shed. Perry gets an idea involving Nancy Gilman and a lie detector test, has Della set it up, and then gets Gilman to agree. The questions are...
Is your first name Nancy? Are you married to Carter Gilman? Did you know a person named Vera M. Martell? Do you live in Los Angeles? Has anyone tried to blackmail you during the past 3 months? Are you the mother of a daughter named Glamis? Do you know Stephen A. Barlow?
And the results?
As far as your case is concerned, Mr. Mason, she's telling the truth. I'm sure she never knew Vera Martell, and she's never been blackmailed.
Paul uncovers another Martell connection, the mysterious Monroes. And back in court, Hartley Elliott sings like a canary. Berger's so happy he tramples all over legal decorum.
Your Honor, I had Mr. Mason served last night with a subpoena deuces taken. I should like to know at this time if he brought to court with him the evidence that he surreptitiously and wrongfully removed from the scene of the crime.
Your Honor, I must certainly object.
Let Perry conduct his cross-examination, Ham. Turns out Perry knows the truth. That Phyllis Monroe and Glamis Barlow are twins? Now it's Perry's turn to run roughshod over legal decorum. Back to the witness stand, Nancy.
Is Glamis Barlow your daughter?
Yes.
What was her father's name?
John Yerman.
Is Phyllis Monroe your daughter?
Yes.
Glamis Barlow and Phyllis Monroe are identical twins. Both daughters of John Yerman?
Yes.
And now back to you, Hartley.
Mr. Elliott, when you first met Glamis, you must have realized she was an identical twin to Phyllis Monroe. You saw a chance to pick up some money, blackmail money. You hired Vera Martell to investigate both girls, did you not?
Yes.
Hartley got Vera Martell involved, then tried to marry into the cash and cut Martell out. Tell us what he did, Perry.
Then what did you do, Mr. Elliott? You quietly put your hands around the throat of this woman who stood in your way, and you...
Yes. I choked her. I didn't mean to kill her.
So, just what's going to happen to all that money?
Was the $2 million on inheritance, or was it a settlement? Will Phyllis get the balance of the estate, or will she share with Glamis in the $2 million? It's a very thorny legal problem.
You know what Perry's advice is going to be, but we'll save that for the Perry Proverbs section. For only the second time in this fourth season, we have an episode based on a novel. Earl Stanley Gardner released The Case of the Duplicate Daughter in 1960. I had a tough time tracking this one down. Thank God for openlibrary.org, which is where I finally got a hold of it. 5 things about the novel you might want to note. Number 1, maybe Earl Stanley was going on a diet, but there's so much calorie talk in the novel. The whole additional egg and sausage is poo-pooed by Perry as being a genuine request from Gilman, mostly because Gilman is described as chubby, and Perry reasons he wouldn't willingly take in all those extra calories without some ulterior motive. Good thinking, Perry. And Della's on a diet because she's disappointed with what her scale said some other morning. She comes into the office, she's only eaten toast, and then she's got to hear Perry describe venison sausage and eggs. Then Perry reports in detail that he and Della are going for a big meal, and he reports on it to the resident switchboard operator, and then she bemoans that she's on a diet and the calorie count that it requires from her, and she's feeling hungry because Perry's talking about Number 2, we get more details about the girls in the novel. So Muriel is an actress, Glamis is a Spitfire, and she has the temerity to flirt with Perry. Number 3, we get some plot detours that get cut from the episode. This is something I've grown to appreciate about the television episodes, the way in which the TV writers seem to know, yeah, that's just not going to work for a 50-minute episode. So Gilman runs an investment company, and he's got a partner, might be the Hartley Elliott character, but that's not true. He's just a guy that Gilman maybe suspects is doing dirty deeds dirt cheap on the side. It's a plot cul-de-sac that goes nowhere. They cut that. They also cut out the secretary who pretends to be Vera Martell on the phone. That's a whole runaround that gets jettisoned. And then they also cut, although this is odd, Paul revealing that Vera Martell's reputation is that of a blackmailer extraordinaire. It would have been a nice characterization moment showing that Paul sort of knows his competition. When the name Vera Martell comes up, Paul's like, oh, I know her. She blackmails everybody. But that gets cut from the episode too. Number 4, Paul gets called to the witness stand by Hamilton Berger. It's always fun when a member of Perry's team gets put on the witness stand, not in the episode. And number 5, Perry, as he is wont in the books, does not solve the case in court. It's interesting to see that Earl never really bought into that hallmark of the television series, even after the television series was well underway. Although I will note that in the case of The Waylaid Wolf, the other novel that was adapted into an episode this season, that actually happened. That is, the guilty party confessed in court. By the way, I was watching The Case of the Fan Dancer's Horse the other night. That's an episode that, by some fans' reckonings, was the second episode ever made, despite its late run in season 1. That is, it wasn't the second episode ever aired, but it was, by some reckoning, the second one filmed. And that episode has an ending that's so much more like the typical novel ending. Mason gets the case thrown out in court, but we have to wait until the denouement in order to discover that the murderer was Jasper. That setup is basically the only way it works in the novels. It's definitely the way it works in the case of the duplicate daughter. Now, let's get trivial, shall we? Each episode in our trivia section, I give you 3 takeaways. Paul is a subject worth investigating more. Adela is a deep dive on an actor or actress who guest starred in the episode. And finally, a Perry is something we learn about our intrepid hero. Our Paul prompt for this episode involves lie detector tests. I'm interested in one particular feature of this test, the repeated question.
Very good, Mrs. Gilman. Now, we'll repeat the same questions in the same order 2 more times, just to make sure of our results.
Our prompt: is this actually what happens when you take a good lie detector test? You repeat the battery of questions 3 times? Let me know what you find, Pauls. Our Della for this episode could be none other than Joyce Mackenzie, a.k.a. Nancy Gilman.
You're either drunk or crazy.
Here's 10 about Joyce. 1. Born Joyce Elaine Mackenzie, October 13th, 1925, Redwood City, California. Her father was a doctor. Number 2. During World War II, worked as a secretary in the San Francisco shipyards. Number 3, 1946, moves to Pasadena where she works as a department store cashier and performs at the city's, wait for it, community playhouse. This leads to her discovery by none other than Orson Welles, who casts her in a small role in Tomorrow is Forever. Number 4, she appears in a variety of roles through the late 40s and early 50s. There's The Kid from Brooklyn, Whirlpool, and Mother Didn't Tell Me. Number 5, by the early 1950s, she's actually seen as a promising Hollywood starlet. There's a role alongside Robert Mitchum in The Racket, and one alongside Humphrey Bogart in Deadline USA. Number 6, in 1953, she plays Jane in Tarzan and the She-Devil opposite Lex Barker, a film that, according to some, revitalized the Tarzan film series. Number 7, She marries real estate mogul Tim Limer and briefly retires. However, she only had guest appearances when she gets back into the acting biz at the husband's request. Her appearance on this episode of Perry, that's Joyce Mackenzie's last acting credit. Number 8, she gets divorced from Limer. She marries construction tycoon Bob Driver in 1961, and she works for a couple of years as an assistant producer for ABC. Number 9, she gets divorced again in 1967, but this time she pursues a higher education degree, graduating with a degree in English and a teacher training certificate, and she teaches high school English at Laguna Niguel in California. In fact, she ends up marrying a high school math teacher named Victor Hassing. Now, I knew the guy's name, I didn't know what he did, but I tracked this guy down because someone wrote a book on computational math and dedicated the book to Hassing, and then acknowledged Joyce for sending a photo of Victor to the author for inclusion in the book, although he didn't mention that she used to be a Hollywood actress. The fact that a whole generation of people had as their high school English teacher somebody who was once a Hollywood actress, appeared in Perry Mason as Jane, is kind of wild. Number 10, Hassing dies in 1980. Joyce retires from teaching in 1989, and following a series of strokes in 2007, she moves into a retirement home, and she finally died in 2021. Our Perry for this episode involves some delightful tete-a-tetes about our man's rep with Trag. First, there's Perry the doorman.
Well, Perry Mason answering doors.
Then there's the way Trag intrudes upon Perry, Della, and Paul at a bar during the judge's recess.
Perry, unofficially and as a friend, I'm tipping you off. 2 hours after court, Hartley Elliott cracked and hollered for the DA. I'm sorry, Perry. Really sorry.
Maybe it was Perry's politeness that earned the apologies from Trag. Our theme for this episode is duplicates, of course. First, we get the title's most overt reference.
But where Mr. and Mrs. Gilman are concerned, they're duplicate and devoted daughters.
That is, Muriel and Glamis, at least according to Carter Gilman, are supposed to be photo negatives of each other. But that's not the only duplicate we've got. There are also duplicate keys.
Well, I'd taken impressions of Vera Martell's keys and a duplicate's made.
And would you tell this court, please, for whom you made a duplicate set of Vera Martell's keys? Carter Gilman had duplicates made of Vera Martell's keys.
So what do we learn from all these doubles? I mean, the entire Perry world is premised on duplication. The same sort of thing keeps happening and happening and happening. And is it just me, or does Don Dubbins, a.k.a. Hartley Elliott, seem like a duplicate of Steve Franken? That's the actor who appears in next season's The Case of the Deadly Verdict. Maybe it's just me. All I know is there's no duplicating Perry. Just watch him try. Now, it's time for a Perry proverb. Our Perry proverb for this episode features Perry's best advice for dealing with a thorny will in inheritance case.
Well, simple. Just hire a good lawyer.
Good one, Perry. I know who you'd recommend, but frankly, there were some other prime candidates for the Perry proverb in this episode. Let's run through them.
I have never defied the process of this or any other court, nor do I intend to start now. Would you also characterize murder as stupid? That is probably the police. When they're finished, let me know if you think they're drunk or crazy.
It's always a delight when you get quotable quotes from our man Perry. Now, let's go grab a swig from the water cooler.
You know, there is one thing I don't understand.
Go on, Paul.
Each time we visit the water cooler, we take time to listen to what Paul's been digging up. Our Paul prompt from the last episode involved rockets, namely private companies who helped the U.S. develop rockets during the Cold War. Aunt Mai did some legwork. She discovered that the Thor rockets were developed by the U.S. government, and they were developed from the PGM-17 intermediate range ballistic missiles. She unfortunately did not track down any private companies. My own research led me to 4 different private companies that work with the military during the Cold War, each of them named after their founders, just like in the case of the misguided missile. We've got Hughes, Howard Hughes, Lockheed, Lockheed, was a phonetic spelling of Alan Lockheed's last name, who founded the group. There was Norman, founded by Jack Norman, and then Grumman, founded by Leroy Grumman. All 4 of those companies dealt in aeronautics and rocketry in the 1950s and 1960s. And in fact, Norman Grumman is now a combined company that still works in aeronautics. And of course, Lockheed joined with Martin some time back. All of those could have been possible models for the companies we find in the case of the misguided missile. Thanks, Paul. Now it's time for some listener letters. Aunt Mai shared that she's listening to the Sonia Sotomayor autobiography, and it turns out Sonia digs Perry. Quote, she became a lawyer after watching Perry Mason. As a child, she was good at observing the world and evaluating. She wanted to be a detective, but a doctor's office pamphlet said she couldn't be a police officer because she had diabetes. She liked Perry Mason when he used reason and observation to serve justice. She even liked Berger because he wanted justice to prevail, even when it went against his first opinions of what had happened. She also liked the judges in the episodes. End quote. Thanks, Aunt Mai. New listener John also wrote in, quote, I've been watching Perry Mason on Pluto for the last 4 months. Such a fun show. I've been hitting your pod after watching each episode. I kept seeing no new pods until today, and I was worried that maybe Trag had you in custody. Maybe his identifying mark on your podcast equipment. In all seriousness, I hope all is well. I plan to listen to the most recent one tonight after I rewatch the episode, and then I'll try to watch upcoming episodes so I can follow you real time. Love the podcast. It's a perfect blend of fun and info, and glad you're back. All the best, John from Minnie. Thanks for tuning in, John. As always, I'd love to hear from you. Have a comment on the episode, the pod in general? Drop me a line at theperrypod@gmail.com. Join us next time when your favorite fourth wheel in mind makes his first appearance in Perryland. David Gideon, he's a fourth wheel. But first he'll have to be accused of killing someone so that Perry can get him off. It's the case of the grumbling grandfather. Join us, won't you? Until then, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue beat!